Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we're going to take a look at Sub Generator, a new plugin from Denise Audio, which is actually free with any purchase of any of their other plugins through the end of February 2021. So I highly recommend picking up some other stuff from Denise Audio. They got some great plugins. Bad Tape is great. Noise 2 is great. Perfect Plate is excellent. It's one of my favorite plate reverb plugins there. So with any of those, you get this thing for free. It's a great sub generator. We're going to talk about what exactly it does in a second. But first, just to quickly go over the controls. First of all, fully resizable, which is nice. So let's get it nice and big so we can look at the controls. Typical input and output gain, a mix control, high pass and low pass filters, which shape the signal used to generate the sub. The rise is kind of unique. The rise softens the sub attack and kind of ignores transients. Think of it as how long it takes for that sub to sort of start as the original signal starts in. Your frequency is your center frequency for the generated sub signal, and the fall smooths out the generated sub and increases the sub tail. Drive adds some distortion to that sub signal, kind of helps it cut through the mix a little bit better. Mono collapses the low end to mono below whatever selected frequency you've got. Here it's 20 hertz, but I can slide it around to whatever amount I want, so I don't have a real wide stereo image on the low end. Dance is a host-synced volume shaping effect for sort of like a sidechain compression pumping effect, good for EDM music. The sidechain up here on the top left engages a sidechain input, so you can have a sidechain signal feeding into this, generating the subs. When you click on replace, it filters out the original signal's low end and completely replaces it with the generated sub, or when it's off, it adds that sub in addition to the low end that's already in that original signal. You can solo up the generated signal by itself. And the adapt button has the generated sub follow the volume envelope of the source. If adapt is not on, it'll just have the sub there the whole time. So if I click it off, it just leaves that sub signal on right now. So I've got sub generator instantiated on a kick drum track. I'm going to bypass the plugin first and just play the kick drum by itself. It's a solid kick drum sound for sure, but I want to beef up that low end a little bit. So all I did here was dial in the rise and fall I wanted for how I want it to kind of onset that sub signal. I picked a sub frequency that I want, 60 hertz in this case, which is a great kick drum frequency. Another little cool feature here is if I click on the dot, I can see the actual note it is. It's B0, but 60 hertz right there. And dialed in the mix to what I wanted. Here it is with the generated sub with it. Without, and back in. If I hit the replace button here, it takes out the kick drum's low end. It just has the generated sub signal, 60 hertz and below. I'll change this value. I kind of like it with the actual kick drum sound itself too. If I boosted up the drive, sounds cool. It doesn't really work with the kick drum though. Without again. And back in. Just a nice way to add some low generated sub to the signal there. Let's move on to a snare drum part here. Now the snare drum for sub generator, I picked a specific frequency here, G2, which equates to 196 hertz. I dialed in the rise and fall that I wanted. Nothing really going with the high and low pass filter here. Mix is only 22%. Here's the snare signal without sub generator engaged. And then I'll engage sub generator and dial in the mix. Out and with. And it sounds on its own when you don't hear it in the context of the full drum mix, kind of artificial. It's too tuned to that specific note, but you don't notice that when you put it in with the rest of the instruments in the mix here. So let me just go in for my full drum mix here. I'm going to start without sub generator on the snare part, and then I'll add it back in. You'll hear how the snare drum fills out. In. It's out now. Back in. Just kind of fills things out, thickens things up a bit. So now we're going to take a look at it on a rack tom part. What I'd like to do with rack toms and any tom part is take a spectrum meter, kind of find out where the fundamental frequency is. You can see it's tailing off about here. This spectrometer shows me note values. If I go a little bit below the frequency, I get around G sharp 1. Right at the bottom end of that fundamental for the tom part. So what I did is took sub generator, clicked on this button next to frequency to put it in note value, selected G sharp 1, dialed in a little bit of drive, the high pass and low pass filters, the rise and fall to the shape I wanted, and then dialed in the mix. So our toms went from this to this. Just filled things out in that fundamental frequency, again without and with. A lot more bottom and fullness to the tom part. If I go through that same exact process with the floor tom, I find our fundamental frequency down here. Go a little bit lower than it usually. B0 is about where it is. That's 60 hertz, I think, isn't it? 62, there we go. B0, dial in the values I want in terms of mix. Here's our tom part without it. And then I'll dial in sub generator. A little bit more mix. You go to a section with a busier tom part. Without, kind of thin and papery. With, nice and full. And we can dial in that mix back a little bit if we don't want too much. So there we have it, sub generator from Denise Audio, a really simple way to dial in nice full bottom end to percussive elements in your mix, or really anything else you want to dial in a sub generator for. It's a little bit different than other plug-in synthesizers that kind of create low-end energy. This one creates actual sub frequencies. Sometimes plugins like R-Bass from Waves, for example, add higher harmonics, so you get the perception of lower frequencies, but not the actual frequency itself. This adds those low ends in, so it handles it a little bit differently than some other sub generators. It's unique in that way and a great tool. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.